Hello, everyone. My name's Daniel Hooper. Thank you. My name's Daniel Hooper, and I'm here with my colleague Stan Stevens. And between the two of us, we work on Principal. And Principal is a prototyping tool. For those of you that haven't used it, it lets you not only design the way that your interfaces and websites look, but also the way they work and what it feels like to interact in it. Before we get into that, I just want to say this is our first time in Moscow, first time in Russia. So thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here. So a little background on me. Before Principal, I was an engineer at Apple, and I worked on all of the different photography apps. So everything from Photos to the camera app, then iPhoto, and finally Photos for Mac. And throughout this whole process, I did everything from the low-level engineering to working on how the filters worked and optimizing the GPU, all the way up to working with Apple's design team and working on new UIs and working really closely with them. And something that I kind of learned throughout this process was how important it is for creators to have a direct and immediate connection to their creations. And what do I mean by this? Well, if we look at other creative fields, we have painters, and they can get a paintbrush and put pigment directly on the canvas and immediately see the result. Same with musicians. You can think of a melody and then play it on the piano. And sculptors, they can make a statue directly out of the stone. And there's another artist, though, that doesn't have this direct and immediate connection to their work. And unfortunately for us, that's UI designers. So this made me sad. And to get into why designers don't have a direct and immediate connection to our work, we have to kind of look at our workflow and see how this plays out. So as designers, the first thing we do when we're working on a new interface is we draw pictures of the screens or different pages. And these are just pictures. They don't move, they don't animate, we can't touch them, and so they don't speak for themselves. So after we create these pictures, we have to present them to our managers, our colleagues, the engineers, and we have to convince them that our ideas are worth pursuing. So if we convince them that what we've designed is the right way to go, then the engineers can go and write the code for it. And finally, after all of that, we have something that we can actually touch and use and see what this might actually be like as a real product. And not only is this a lot of steps, but if you look at the time for these different things, the meetings can take hours, and then writing the code can take days or even weeks in some case. And it all comes down to mere seconds of using it. You may look at a design for seconds and realize that you don't actually like the design after all, or maybe the engineers misunderstood what you told them. And so this multi-week process comes down to a few seconds and then gets thrown out the window. And you have to start it all over again. And so I think with a process this long, it's going to prevent us from doing our best work because we don't have a direct and immediate connection to our work. So some people, some brave designers, have said, we'll just cut out the middleman and we'll learn how to program. So then if I have an idea as a designer, I can just write some code, and the thinking is, instead of taking weeks, maybe the code will take hours because I can cut corners and just make it look like it works correctly. And so this gets you a little bit closer to having your ideas speak for themselves, but this still makes me sad because we don't have a direct and immediate connection to our work. We're working in code, not UI. And it's not immediate. It's still taking maybe hours to create something. So I asked myself if other artists had to go through code to do their work, would we have any masterpieces like this? And I think the answer is probably no. Now, that's just an intuitive explanation for why I think code is a poor fit for any creative endeavor. But it goes a bit deeper than that if you look at the way that product teams are structured. See, we typically have engineering and we have design. And you can think of these as being on a spectrum of different specialties. And on one end, we have physics. The engineering is ultimately dealing with the limitations of physics. And then designers are dealing with psychology, the way the brain works, and physiology, the way our bodies work and what our bodies are capable of. And another way you could think of these is engineering deals with the machine, and design deals with the human. And then anywhere in between there, there's all different specialties. Everything from the way the CPU works to color theory, all the way up to emotion and desire and human capability. So as designers, we need to be focusing on the human side of this spectrum. And if we start programming, we're going to have to start thinking about the machine. And we're going to have to start thinking about what the machine needs. And I think that can be dangerous as designers because we need to put the priorities and the needs of the human first. And if we're having to balance those with the computer, then maybe we start making compromises. We start making things that are easier for the machine instead of being better for the human. So where does this leave us? We don't want to have to rely on others to create our ideas, and we don't want to have to go through code to create them. What we want is a direct connection to our work. We want to work directly in the final medium, and we want to see immediately how this is going to work. We want to be able to see exactly what we're doing without having to wait for weeks. So where does this leave me? Well, after Apple, I spent time thinking about all this and what I wanted to do next. And what followed was 2 years of work on what eventually became Principal. And 2 years is a long time to work on a project, especially in my case, it was just me working on it for 2 years. And much of this came down to user studies. And I'm sure many of you have done user studies for your work. For those of you that haven't done user studies, I can just personally say this has been the key to any success I've had in any of my design work. Because as designers, we gain experience by working on designs and seeing what works and what doesn't work, but at the end of the day, humans are unpredictable, and you'll always be surprised by the way they respond to your work. So I would have ideas that I thought were genius and would work great, and then I would put it in front of a designer at a company, and they would have no idea how to use it. And so this process went on for 2 years, but luckily I had this guiding light because I knew that designers needed a direct and immediate connection to their work. And so after 2 years of applying that, I made Principal. And I want to show you a little bit about how Principal works now. All right, so this is Principal, and for those of you that haven't used it before, it probably looks pretty familiar to other design tools that you've used. See, we have a canvas here. We can add shapes to it and just position them however we like. And you can also have multiple artboards, so you can have different states of your app or different screens. So I can put this in a different spot on the screen. We have our layer list here and then the properties of our layers here. And the one thing that's unique here about Principal is this preview screen. And this preview screen really gets interesting when you start adding interactions. So we have this lightning button. And we can click this and say we want to add a tap interaction. And when you tap, it goes from this artboard to artboard 2. And you see that created a transition for us. So right away, I can tap this layer and it animates down to the bottom of the screen. I could add another transition back. And just like that, I can see how this is going to animate. And this is a silly example, of course, but maybe it can give you a sense of what's possible when you're applying this in a real design. You can even go in here, and I've clicked the transition arrow, and I could change the animation properties. Maybe I want to use a spring animation for the Y value, and I can see what that looks like. So it bounces down to the bottom. Maybe I want to delay the color animation, so I can just move that over, make the animation take a bit longer. It moves down and then turns green after a delay. And so those are kind of the basic building blocks of Principle. And for many of you, this is going to feel very familiar to existing tools. So you don't have to go into a different headspace. You don't have to think about learning a new skill set. So let's go ahead and make something that looks a bit more like a real UI you might make. We'll just do something simple like a settings UI here. We have the title, and we'll just have one setting on this screen. We'll say use cellular. And we're going to have a switch for this. So I'll make the switch round. I'll give it a shadow and a white fill. And I'm going to duplicate that layer, and this will be the background of the switch. And we'll give the background a stroke and remove the shadow. So in a typical design tool, this would be about as far as you could get. You would just have these two screens, and you could put the switch in the on state over here. We'll give it a green fill just so we can really see that it's on. So this is just our standard design process so far, but then we add the interaction, and we have the switch turning on and off. And so that's great, and we can see kind of just the basic UI that we can put together, but typically you're going to be working on something more complicated than this. So I'm going to close this. We'll create a new file. And for many of us, we're working in Sketch. And so I have a Sketch document here that I've already created. It has 3 artboards. And what I really want to do is just pick up from the static design phase and bring it in to Principle. So I'll click Import. It sees the sketch file, and I'll click Import. And our 3 screens come into play here. So I'm going to just start adding interactions now. I want to select these layers, and I'll make them scrollable. And right away, I can see in the screen what the scroll feels like. And in this UI, we have these buddy circles. So if we want to send a message to our friend, we can tap on them, and it goes to this Compose UI. And we'll just add a tap to get back. So we can scroll around, tap the buddy icon, and get out. So you see, the work that I'm having to do to add these interactions is really not much more than your typical design process. If we want to make this layer draggable, I can just select these 2 layers and mark them as drag. And now in this UI, I can drag the layer around. I can still click it and get back out. So if some of you are familiar with this UI, we want to be able to get rid of the buddy once the conversation is over. So we'll make it so once you begin dragging, it goes to the second artboard. And on this artboard, we have this delete layer in view. And on the second artboard, when the drag ends, we'll go back to the first artboard. And we can try that out now. We start dragging, and you see this layer comes into view and moves out of view. And so we're really starting to get a sense of what this flow might look like. And since many of us are working on teams that have multiple designers in them, a good way to integrate the work is you have other designers create their own components. So we can drag in this settings screen that we just created, and you see this comes in as a single layer, but this layer contains all of the interaction that we created before. And if we want to just double-click that, we can go in and see that whole component, and it's everything that we built earlier. So what I'd like to have happen is have the settings screen behind everything else. And so I'll move it to the back. I'll group these layers, and I'll make it so you can drag to get the settings screen into view. So now I can just pull this down, I can change the setting and pull it back up. Now, already I see I don't really like that you can just pull it down to any position and then change the setting. I'd like it if it would just snap down at the bottom so it's fully out of the way. So if I had waited until an engineer made this UI, that could have been weeks until I had seen that. So we can just go ahead and add it right now. So we'll say when the drag ends, we'll go to a duplicate of this screen where the background is fully out of view. And then likewise, when you tap the header of this layer, it'll take you back to the home screen. So let's try it. I drag this layer, it goes all the way down to the bottom, and now we can change the settings and then get back to the home screen. And so in just a few minutes, we've taken a static design, we've added interaction, we've added animation, and we've integrated work from other designers on our team. And at the end of the day, maybe we want to share this, we want to send it to other team members to show them what we're thinking, or since this is a Dribbble meetup, we want to share it to Dribbble. So we can click record, and I'll use a touch cursor since this is a touch UI. And then I can just start to show off this UI. I'll click the icon to stop recording. And I'm going to choose the Dribbble preset. And for the background color, I'll make it match the sky. And then we'll just save that. So it'll render this and compress it, and we'll be able to share this and show everyone what we've been working on and get feedback on it instantly. And we didn't have to learn how to program. We didn't have to wait on anyone else. And it feels like we're first-class artists again. We have a direct connection to our work. So that's Principal. And Principal is already being used at a lot of companies that you may have heard of. And many of these companies are quite large. And I think it's worth recognizing that in large companies, because it can take so long for all the different teams to get through their work and to synchronize on the different issues that need to be completed, prototyping is even more valuable in these types of work environments. Because when you iterate quickly, you're saving weeks of many design teams' time and many engineers' time. So it's really a big time saver in these situations. So if any of this has you excited, you can go to Dribbble, you can search Principal, and every day designers are doing really amazing work with Principal. It's fun to see what they're doing. You can get some ideas there. And if you want, you can go to principalformac.com. We have a free trial. You can check it out. And we have some great tutorials on the website. Each one's maybe only 5 minutes long, so you can just sneak them in when you have time. And if you need help with anything or you want to show off what you've done outside of Dribbble, we have a Facebook group. And there's a lot of really talented designers on here that are very helpful and happy to give feedback on what you're doing. So like I said, it's principalformac.com. And that's my talk. I'm going to bring up Stan Stevens, the other engineer on the team, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks. So there's a second mic, and so we'll have some questions. Вопросы, в общем, задавайте на английском, пожалуйста. Ты уверен? Давай так.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for your application. I really love and inspired by your project, and I use Principal from the first version. I love it. It's a good job. But second version of Principal was released in 2016. Yes. And what is the future of Principal? Maybe you want to add some features, and can you talk more about it?
Sure.
Some future.
Yeah. So just first off, I'll say we don't normally comment about future plans, so I can't go into too much detail. Like I said, I used to work at Apple, so very secretive. They taught me well. But yeah, so the last major release was in 2016, and we've done some smaller releases in November and December. I can say we're working on some really great stuff now. We're certainly not resting at all. We're working just as hard as we always have. I think you'll like the new version that we're working on. It's taking a long time because we're changing a lot of things. That's all I'll say about that, but I think you'll like it.
Hello, thank you for Principal. Will Principal have opportunity to work with vector, SVG files, and gradient?
Will it be able to import SVG?
Yes, from Sketch.
Well, Principal can already import anything you create in Sketch. Stan actually did most of that work. So I'm not sure I understand the question. You can draw layers and they all come into Principal. Sorry? Editing vectors inside Principal, got you. Yeah, so that's a possibility. The issue with SVG is that there are certain performance implications of that. If we represented everything as SVG, it wouldn't have native performance. So if we were to get into that, we would have to make some important trade-offs. But yeah, it's certainly a possibility.
Hello, thank you for your lecture, it's great. My question, when we will get production-ready code from Principal to Xcode, for example? It's possible maybe in future or 5 years?
Will we be able to export code?
Yes, production-ready code from Principal animation to Xcode, because get all parameters from Principal to Xcode and grade it in application. It's sometimes problem. If we can export animation from Principal to Xcode, for example, or Android Studio, it will be helpful and save a lot of time.
Yeah, so exporting animations or code for the animations, you can imagine a world in which you press a button and then what comes out of it is something that you can just put directly in the application. There's certain challenges with that, though, because there's not just one programming language out there. And even if you say, well, just target JavaScript, there's so many animation frameworks for JavaScript. If we added export for one, then it wouldn't work for everyone else. That's kind of a technical reason, but also the issue is many code bases have their own styles, they have different technologies, and what Principal would export, or any code export, may not mesh with the code that's already there. And in addition to that, the way that you design your interfaces in Principal are usually not the way that an engineer has to do it for real. So for example, in Principal right now, you don't have to worry about resizing controls. You don't have to worry about localization. You don't have to worry about different processor speeds or color depths. And these are things that engineers have to worry about in the real world. And so there's information there that you're not able to put into Principal that needs to be in the real design. So all that to say is, in order to let you work really quickly, we kind of gloss over that. And it's kind of up to the engineer to apply their experience and expertise in order to kind of fill in those gaps. If there was code export, I would say if you've ever used Dreamweaver from back in the day, Dreamweaver would create code from a visual representation. And that was a notoriously bad code export. It's a very difficult problem to get right. So hopefully that answer gives you some insight into that problem.
Hi guys, thank you for amazing product. I really love it. I use Principle, something about here, and I have a question about your team. Is this only 2 members in your team? Please tell us about your design process or something. How many members in your team? Is this only you two?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? We
How
couldn't
big is
hear
the
the
team?
beginning of the question.
Again, hello guys, thank you for amazing product. I really love it. Please tell us about your process, maybe design processes in your company, maybe about how many members in your team.
Sure. Yeah, so how
Thank you.
big is the team and what is our design process like?
Oh.
You want to talk about that?
The entire team is right here. It's just me and Daniel.
Yeah.
So, Principle. Yeah, so, as Daniel said, he worked on it for 2 years, and about 1.5 years ago, I was hired to help with the engineering, and so here we are. And the second part was our design process. Yeah, so we have like a major release that we work on that will take a few months, and so we always choose something to design around for that big release. So, and that's probably the most important thing, is deciding what to do for the major release. In between those times, we're working on smaller fixes, smaller features, but the big decision is what's going to be the focus of our major release. And so we do that by being in touch with our users, doing user testing, looking at Dribble, seeing what's being created, and by doing that, we can see what's the biggest thing that designers want and what can we do in the app that's the biggest need at the moment. And so we talk to the users and figure out the biggest problem that we want to address, and then we set a date for our major release, and that's what we work towards.
Yeah. And I'm typically handling all of the design, and a lot of that is a very iterative process. Sometimes I'll have ideas about how I want to solve a certain problem, but like Stan said, it really comes down to user testing to see if it will actually work. And sometimes Stan will just use the app. I'll design something and he'll be my user, so I can test it on him. And likewise, if he adds a new feature, I'll be the user. And so we kind of are the first level of testers before it goes out into the real world.
And to bridge the gap between the design and engineering, we've designed part of Principle in Principle, which is pretty cool. But our recent iOS update, we sat down, designed a lot of it in Principle, and Daniel led the design, and we were able to use that to communicate to me the engineering side. So.
Yep.
Hi guys, thank you for our application. I'm currently using it for prototyping. Here's the question: do you plan to develop Principle as an animation tool more than a prototype tool? And do you plan to add a support of plugins?
Okay. Do we view it more as an animation tool than a prototyping tool?
Yeah, and what are your plans on that, on the animation?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Plans on
Yes.
Plans for animation?
Yes. Adding different effects, moving forward to like After Effects application, or you plan to make it just like a prototyping tool with a pinch of animation in it?
Yeah, so Principle, I don't like really distinguish it and saying it's either more of an animation tool or more of a prototyping tool. It's a tool for UI designers. And at the end of the day, we're going to keep working to make it better for people that are working in that field. If we learn that UI designers need more animation power, we'll head that direction. If they need more prototyping power, we'll head that way. It's totally based on what we're hearing from them. That said, we do have kind of a wide range of users. We have people on desktop designing desktop apps. We have people designing web apps and iOS apps. And some people are just working on interactions. Some people actually use Principle to make animations that will just be on a website, like looping. Like Facebook used Principle to make a product announcement animation, which was really surprising to us because that's not at all how we ever viewed it as being used. But it's great that it is flexible enough to be used for those types of things. So yeah, in summary, it's a tool for UI designers, and whatever that means now and in the future is how we're going to shape it.
Hello, thanks for your report. Can you tell me about the advantages of Principle over Flinto?
Over Flinto?
Da.
Sure. I'll start off by saying both tools have free trials. I'm a big believer in just trying it. I think Principle is really great just to use. We don't like adding features just to trick people into getting it. We have some people that say, add this feature and I'll get it, or can it do X, Y, Z? And we say, well, no, because in the real world, you actually don't use that much. But back to your question, I think Flinto and Principle, we just have different approaches. And for different people, the tools may be more or less powerful. I think Principle, you can typically work a bit faster because you don't have to line up layers and animations and say this layer is this layer in the other screen. But Flinto has other advantages. So I'd say use both and see which one works better for you.
Hi, thank you for presentation. And my question is, do you have a plan to make Android mirror app for Principle?
So, Android. So I have an Apple background, and I feel as a former Apple engineer, I have to continue the Android war. But the reality is I'm not an Android developer. I don't know anything about that, which is primarily why we don't have that. Android is a challenging platform to develop for, especially with a team as small as ours. With iOS, we can test on a phone and an iPad and be very confident that the performance and features are going to be where we need them to be on all devices. Because Android is so fragmented, it has many different versions, it has many different devices, it can be difficult for a team like ours to guarantee that the performance and features will be what we need them to be at the level of quality we expect. So Android's a possibility in the future if I decide to learn Android, but that's just a background on why we don't have Android right now. And I will say, if you have an iOS device around you, at the end of the day, a touchscreen is a touchscreen. So you can design an Android UI and just view it on a phone, an iPhone. And that's what many designers do.
Hello, thank you for perfect app. And my question, when will you make a background blur function?
Will we make
this dream for all iOS designers?
I'm sorry, it's very hard to hear.
He asks, when will you make a background blur?
Make it for what?
Background blur. Background blur.
Background blur.
Background blur.
Background blur.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so background blur, there are technical limitations to adding that and running it at real time. I'd be happy to tell you more about that later, because it is a very technical thing. There are some major trade-offs with background blur, and if you've done any work with that, you have to have your layers arranged in a very specific way in order to have the performance what you expect it to be. And because we want Principal to be a tool that you can use really quickly, we don't want to add features that will work sometimes, but then if you do something unique in it, suddenly the performance just drops and goes away. So it would be great to add background blur. It's something that we're going to have to look into more and see if we can do it in a way that will be nice to use.
Oh, hi guys. Do you plan to create some project structure manager? Because then screens amount goes out 20, the understandability of structure falls down significantly.
Do we plan to create project management?
Yeah. No, not a planet structure manager. Because, you know, there's a lot of screens, and then they go raise an amount, you know, another one screen, another one. And the stability of my project falls down like a stone.
Our 2.0 release was a step towards addressing that issue because we realized people have started making bigger and bigger projects. We just saw a project the other day that had 170 artboards, and so we realized the projects can get very big and that can make it hard to manage. So for our 2.0 release, we released components, which Daniel created with his settings screen when he was doing the demo. And that's one step we're taking towards starting to make it easier to manage your files, because you can group parts of the app into components and make your individual interactable component. And by doing that, you actually can group screens into different parts. And you can actually work with separate files and then drag the file in. And so that's how separate team members could be able to work on part of the app, or, part of the design. So that was one of the first things we're doing to head towards making it easier to manage these large prototypes.
Second one question, what? Do you think that timeline animation is not very cozy for the workflow? I mean that conception of frame-to-frame transition that Flint use is more flexible and clear. Timeline more cozy for animators, not for the common designer.
Do I think timeline animation?
Yeah, timeline animation is not very cozy, I think.
Is not very...
Not cozy, cozy to use, you know?
So, the underlying way that you're saying Flinto doesn't have timeline animation?
Flint don't have it. Flint have a frame-to-frame animation with adjustable transitions between them.
Yeah, so the thing is, Flinto and Principal have the same underlying model. You have two artboards, and then you have animations between them. The only difference there is the way that we display the information to you. See, Flinto doesn't show you the way that time will play out. You click on an object and you can see the properties of that object's animation.
Yeah, and I can adjust any property like is, but then I editing the timeline. It's sometimes very complicated to understand what kind of property I have to adjust, you know.
So you're asking about?
Yeah, I'm asking about maybe some kind of
scrub through time,
plugin or something. Any other information represent to put to the user. Maybe you're planning some.
Yeah, I think there's certainly things we can do to make editing animations easier. You know, I will say the software is relatively new. It's only a year and a half old at this point. And so there's so much more that we can do and that we plan to do. And animation is certainly one of those areas that we think we can make a lot better.
Hello, thank you. I have a question about the future of your project and about its complexity. For example, artists to do his paintings need to know all about materials that he create. So how complex will be principle and maybe in future need to know learning courses to use this instrument.
So how will it work to manage complexity in the future?
Yes, will be your instrument easy to use like now, or it will be very complex and need to be learning more courses to use it?
So will it become harder to use as we add more in the future?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that is kind of a fundamental problem in design. How do you add more features without creating more things to learn? And there's not a magic solution to that. Some people are able to do that better than others. That's something that I think about a lot when I'm designing Principle and adding new things. A lot of people love Principle because they can learn it so quickly and they can work very quickly in it. And so, we have some people that say, I want to add more complex things, and then other people that say, I want to work fast. How do you have both? And all I can say is, since release, we've added a lot of new features, but fundamentally the way Principle has worked hasn't changed. People haven't had to relearn things. I tried to design new features so that they are kind of progressively revealed. So if the animation panel is closed, you don't need to worry about easing curves. You don't need to even think about that if you don't want to. And in the same way, future things that we add to the app, if you don't need them, they won't be in your way. And when you do need them, they'll be right there. And that's at least what we're going to try to strive for.
You mean that Principle will be settings that we can check
to turn on and off different?
Yes, different future functions.
Yeah, so I will say that I hate settings. A lot of people, or I'll say sometimes people will tend to move advanced things behind settings, where you have to turn on advanced mode or enable certain features. And I really, really don't like that, because if I'm a new user and I walk up to someone else's computer, I now sort of have to relearn the app. I have to say, oh, they have this setting turned off or this setting turned on. I've never seen this feature. So it makes the app actually harder to learn and harder to use with settings. So as much as I can help it, I'm not going to add settings. And we're going to try to just have all the features there all the time, but designed in such a way that they are subtle and not invasive in the simpler features that you might need. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it after, but maybe you can just follow along as we add new things and see how we try to approach that.
Okay, I will wait.
All right, great.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Thanks for your work, for your product. And here's the question. A lot of designers work in Sketch now, but we have Adobe XD now. What's about it?
You've adopted what?
Now a lot of designers work in Sketch, and Principle works together. But now we have Adobe XD.
Yeah.
Maybe will Principle support it in the future?
So other people have asked us that, and it's a question that really confuses me because
Why?
Because XD is a prototyping tool. So why do we need to have our prototyping tool do anything with, like, if you're in XD, just use XD.
Principle is much comfortable for this.
I don't know what to tell you with that. I mean, it's a direct competitor, and so I don't really see how that would fit. You know, Adobe has unlimited money and huge teams, and I'm sure that product is going to grow a lot more, and they have their own approach to things. So I'm sure if you imagine a world in which you could import from XD, there would be incompatibilities because maybe they have some way of doing taps and we have a different way or something like that. So it doesn't make very much sense to me to have any interaction there, but you know, maybe I'm wrong and we'll see in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Я думаю, наверное, все. Мы тогда закончим с этим. So, thank you guys, because I think we had a lot of questions, and I saw a lot of fans of you here, and they will ask some question after the talk. Sure. So, thanks.
Yeah,
thank you all.
Thank you.